Well, to dig into the latest numbers, we are now joined by Éric Grenier and Philippe Fournier. Éric, the founder and the writer of the Writ. Philippe, the founder and the writer of 338 Canada. Hello to both of you.
Hi, Michael.
Good evening, Michael.
So listen, this MOU has been described as a political gamble for the Carney government. So first off, with some quick impressions, is this gamble paying off for the Prime Minister? Éric, I'll get you to start us out.
Well, I think that the thing we can say the most is that so far the gamble is not hurting him. It is still very early on in terms of the public opinion environment, whether Canadians are reacting positively or negatively to it. We haven't seen much movement in the polls. When it has been polling that has been asking specifically about a pipeline, about the MOU in particular, we do see that there is pretty broad support for it across the country, including in British Columbia. But whether or not it is going to have longer-term impacts, whether it will, in the longer term, be a good thing for the Liberals, I think will depend primarily on how it unfolds and how things go over the next few months and really the next few years.
Okay, how it unfolds and where it goes. But, Philip, I'll get you into this right now because it seems to do, when you look at the numbers, there does seem to be some early weakness, particularly in Metro Vancouver.
That is correct. The Writ Institute had some fresh numbers post-MOU, and we saw that even though Mr. Carney's himself, his personal numbers did not move, there was a slippage in Liberal support, specifically in Metro Vancouver. I have the numbers right here. They went from 55% to 39%. And so these numbers can be very worrying for the Liberals because the bulk of their seat in British Columbia naturally is in Metro Vancouver. But as Éric said, it is way too early. There are many conditions. Perhaps this pipeline will never see the day. Perhaps this pipeline will take years or even decades to be built. But as far as a gamble, it looks so far like the Liberals are doing fine with it. But it's be very interesting to see early in the year what it does.
Yeah, what it does. And, when we talk about Metro Vancouver, Éric, I think part of the calculus people are trying to figure out is in British Columbia, Liberals have 20 seats. In Alberta, they have 2 seats. If they were to lose in British Columbia, could they make that up in Alberta, is a question being asked.
Yeah, and it seems unlikely. I mean, there was only really 3 seats that the Liberals came pretty close to winning in Alberta, so they would need to see a big jump in Alberta to win those 3 seats. We actually might get a test of that in Edmonton Riverbend when that by-election takes place, whenever it does. But there's so many more seats in the BC Lower Mainland where the Liberals did not win by a large margin, so it wouldn't take much of a drop in support for them to lose those seats. I do think, though, that the calculation is not just about those 20 BC seats and those 2 Alberta seats. It is about what it's going to do nationwide. We did see polling from Abacus Data, for example, asking whether this was a good deal, showing compromise, or whether it was betrayal of the government's past environmental policies. And we saw that there was majority support for the idea that this was a good deal, that this was a good compromise to make, especially in Ontario. So I think that there is the potential that even if this could end up costing them a couple seats in British Columbia, does it actually help Mark Carney's economic reputation in the rest of the country, where maybe it'll matter more?
Matter more. Although I do wonder about the impact of Stephen Guilbeault, because of course here you have a high-profile cabinet minister who has resigned his position in the Carney government over this MOU, and the question is, Philippe, as to the impact of that, particularly in Quebec.
Well, so far the impact seems to be limited. I mean, Monsieur Guilbeault, of course, has been in cabinet for many years, and he's well known in Quebec. But when we look at the polling, we see that a good chunk of Quebecers really don't have an opinion on the man. Abacus Data had numbers on this recently in Quebec, where we see that about a quarter of Quebecers had a good opinion of Monsieur Guilbeault, and 19% had a bad opinion of Monsieur Guilbeault. And so, and in the same poll, we see that Mark Carney has a plus 25 net favorability rating in Quebec. And this is post-MOU. So perhaps I don't want to overplay Mr. Guilbeault. Of course, I don't want to downplay it either. But so far, the effect on Quebec voters appears to be very limited. And again, to go back to the Writ Institute poll, yes, the numbers on pipelines are tighter in Quebec, but it was 49% of Quebec respondents that said they were in favor of this deal. So the impact could be limited.
Yeah, limited, and I think that's kind of the summation at this point. 7 days into the signing of this MOU, the vast majority of the country does seem to be on side, and there are criticisms around it with the environment. So we'll see, and also consultation, I should add. But we'll see where that goes, as both of you are saying. But while you're here, I also want to talk about Quebec right now, not federally, but provincially, because, we're about 2 weeks now from when the Quebec Liberal leader, Pablo Rodriguez, dropped his parliamentary leader for firing her chief of staff, who, by the by, is a friend of Pablo Rodriguez. And then the Journal de Montréal published that report that suggests there was a vote buying scheme attached to Mr. Rodriguez's leadership campaign, an allegation that's now being investigated. But what's been the impact of that, given how close we are now to a Quebec vote, Eric?
Well, it has been a big impact because just before that news broke, we were starting to see some polls where the Parti Québécois numbers were coming down a little bit. The Liberals were inching up a little bit. Because of the PQ's lead among Francophones, it didn't really mean that the PQ was on track to lose an election. But it did suggest that maybe this was going to be a lot closer than we had thought. Then we've seen these stories come out. Philippe can get into the numbers perhaps a bit more in more detail, but we've seen support for the Liberal Party drop. We've seen support for Pablo Rodriguez drop big time. And he's just an opposition leader who's been there for a few months, and he already has numbers that look like he's a 10-year-old government and people are ready to kick him out. So I think it is a real dangerous position for the Quebec Liberals, and the next election is only 10 months away.
Yeah, absolutely. You're nodding your head very strongly there, Philippe.
Well, it's because we were lucky to have polls at the right moment, right? The Palace data poll published with L'Actualité was at the beginning of this implosion for the Quebec Liberals, and it showed that the Liberal brand was doing okay, 25% in voting intentions, roughly the average of what the party had in the past year. However, Monsieur Rodriguez's personal numbers, as Éric alluded to, completely tanked. In one quarter, we saw is unfavorable go up 15 points, and his favorables going down 10 points. That's a swing of 25 points in one quarter. And so we know why that is. And then we had Léger earlier this week that showed that the story are even hurting now the Quebec Liberal brand. Liberals are at 21% voting intentions, only 10% among Francophones. And so right now, if the numbers we have right now translated to the ballot box next October, we would have a huge majority for the Parti Québécois with 39% of the vote.
Yeah, and to that, important to note here, while the Liberal numbers, provincial numbers, are slipping under Pablo Rodriguez, the gain of that is to the Parti Québécois, not to the CAQ.
Well, yes, the CAQ have their own problems over there. 18% in that Léger poll, and Monsieur Legault, the Premier, has a 75% unfavorable rating according to the Palace data poll. And so it looks like the CAQ will have a really steep hill to come back into this race next year.
Yeah, and any last word there, Eric, before we go?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I guess you could say if you're wondering if this election is already done, I mean, Pierre Poilievre did have a 20-point lead only a few months before the election. I'm not sure if there was a Mark Carney waiting in the wings somewhere in Quebec politics, but if there was an election held today, as Philippe said, no doubt that the PQ would win, and obviously that would open up a whole new political discussion in Canada for the next few years.
Well, certainly people are talking more about sovereignty in Ottawa as well, a possibility of that vote in Quebec. But not to get ahead of myself, Eric and Philippe, for today, thank you very much. Thank you for the discussion.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.